Stop paying for draft guides. Stop paying for people's rankings. I'm giving you my top 24 fantasy football running back rankings heading into fantasy football 2024. Let's not waste your time. Let's start in the S tier. And it's no surprise, Christian McCaffrey, the number one running back off the board, the number one player off the board in your fantasy football drafts. Yes, he's an older running back, but the production was so incredible last season. He can take a 10 to 20% hit from his numbers last year and still be a great pick in fantasy. Don't think too hard. Christian McCaffrey, number one. The second running back I have is Breece Hall for the New York Jets. 2 years removed from that ACL tear. Number 4 running back last year, coming off of that injury. Beginning of the season, he does split with Dalvin Cook, but he quickly emerges as the number one option, leaves him in the dust, owns this New York Jets backfield. While the offense was abysmal in 23 for this New York Jets team, Breece Hall still finishes as the running back 4 on the season. Upgrade at quarterback with Aaron Rodgers. Upgraded offensive line through the draft, getting some guys healthy. I expect Breece Hall to be a monster in fantasy football this year. I like taking him in the top 4 of your draft as my number 2 running back off the board. In the A tier, I have bumped Bijan Robinson down to the number 3 spot. He was in my number 2 spot for a long time, but reports are coming out Tyler Algier are going to have a big role this season. Now, this doesn't have that much effect on my ranking of Bijan. We knew Algier was going to play a factor here. Bijan's going to be the number 1 guy, still going to dominate touches in this backfield. But if the coaching staff's going to come out and make a point to say he's going to have a big role, I'm not expecting Algier to split this backfield with Robinson, but he's going to be enough of a nuisance to him to warrant dropping him to the A tier, while Breece Hall and Christian McCaffrey have virtually zero competition in their backfield. That's why Bijan I have dropping to the A tier, even with an upgraded offense in Atlanta and potentially an upgraded coaching regime with no longer having Arthur Smith destroy the weapons that the Atlanta Falcons have. My number 4 running back is Jahmyr Gibbs. Same draft class as Bijan Robinson. Goes a couple picks later him in the draft. Slow start in 23, sitting behind David Montgomery. But as the season wore on, we saw Gibbs take a control of this backfield. Now, we don't exactly know what the goal line work is going to look like. Montgomery definitely going to play a factor for this Detroit Lions team. With a great offense, a great offensive line, probably the best offensive line in the National Football League. In a half PPR league, I do want to rank him in this A tier. In PPR leagues, I think you can make a case he could be above Bijan Robinson, but I'm not willing to do that with David Montgomery being a solidified factor in that Lions backfield, even in an amazing offense. Next 2 guys, I have Jonathan Taylor and Saquon Barkley. I rank these 2 guys very close together ADP-wise. I think it's a coin flip between who you like in this position. Very similar situations. Jonathan Taylor with a running quarterback in Anthony Richardson, and now Saquon Barkley joins Jalen Hurts in this Philadelphia Eagles team. Now, we've seen Saquon be an amazing running back in fantasy behind maybe the worst offensive line in football and one of the worst offenses with the New York Giants. Now he comes over to one of the polar opposite best situations in the NFL. But when it comes down to it, the Philadelphia Eagles offense is going to be significantly better than the Indianapolis Colts projected. So you will see more opportunities for Saquon. But I think this Colts team is going to be more reliant on Jonathan Taylor than the Eagles team will be on Saquon Barkley. So while you might see more touchdown opportunities for Saquon, even with Jalen Hurts being a vulture at the goal line, the fact that this Colts team is going to be so JT-centric, I have to put him above Saquon, given that Saquon has to compete with the likes of Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, whereas JT really is the number 1 option on this team, especially in the red zone outside of Anthony Richardson's legs. My number 7 running back is Travis Etienne. He did finish the season as running back 3 overall. We could have seen an even higher position from Etienne in fantasy if it were not for the Jaguars' second half struggles led by Trevor Lawrence and that injury that he suffered. If we can see a healthy Trevor Lawrence and continue the success they had in the beginning of the season last year, I think Etienne is a fine option in fantasy. Not worried about Tank Bigsby. A lot of people were pumping Tank Bigsby as a sleeper last season. Didn't really have a role in that offense. Etienne dominated that, so no real concern there. I do like Etienne going forward, especially in PPR leagues. He should play a factor in the pass game. Next, I have Kyren Williams. You'd expect a guy who averaged nearly 20 fantasy points per game to be somewhere in the top 5, but there are question marks. Yes, they do draft Blake Corum. That doesn't really concern me all that much. Just a 5th-round running back in Kyren Williams. amazing rookie season, no doubt about it. And Sean McVay in this Rams offense has proven to be a gold mine for running backs in fantasy. We saw that with Todd Gurley for so many years. So while I do love Kyren Williams, especially where his ADP is, I do think there are some concerns with his being a former 5th round pick, so not much draft capital invested in him. And we've seen these late round picks have great rookie seasons and then get kind of tossed to the side. Very recently, Dameon Pierce, James Robinson of a couple years back. I think there are some concerns there from that aspect. My next running back is Josh Jacobs. I think he's one of the most criminally undervalued players, especially in underdog drafts right now. In redrafts, he's definitely more accurately priced, but I love Josh Jacobs. In Las Vegas, he's been a top 12 running back pretty consistently behind bad offensive lines and bad offenses. Now he goes to the Packers, who at the end of last season were one of the best teams in the National Football League, getting a great win in the postseason on the road in Dallas, led by Jordan Love. Gets a brand new contract. So many weapons on offense. Teams don't necessarily need to develop a game plan just to stop Josh Jacobs. They have to worry about Jordan Love and these wide receivers and tight end options in Green Bay. So I think Jacobs as the lead back replacing Aaron Jones. I'm not too worried about A.J. Dillon. He looks like he's horrible. Marshawn Lloyd, there is some buzz in training camp, but I'm not getting too excited about that. I think Josh Jacobs is clearly going to be the number one running back here. And for a team that's probably going to make a lot more trips to the red zone than the Raiders did last season, I'm very excited about a guy who led the NFL in rushing yards just 2 seasons ago. I think he has a potential to be a league winner. That's why I am significantly higher on him than consensus rankings. Another guy I am higher on than most people is Isaiah Pacheco. This is a guy who averaged right around 14 to 15 fantasy points per game last year in PPR leagues. Isaiah Pacheco, outside of Patrick Mahomes, with an aging Travis Kelce, he's become maybe this team's best option on offense. And concerns at the wide receiver position with Rashee Rice in the offseason. I love Isaiah Pacheco for this team. This team loves him. The city loves him. The fans love him. I think Pacheco's a staple in this offense for what projects to be one of the most powerful offenses in the league. Pacheco, who we've seen his snap share gradually increase over the course of the 23 year. This coaching staff trusts him. In the postseason, he is getting 70% plus snap share. He's such an integral part of this team. I have no problem banking on him getting an increase in this offense with some of the receiving options in the backfield departing. I am big on Isaiah Pacheco this year. I'm a little lower on than consensus rankings. Going to be Devon Achane. Now, the efficiency metrics for Achane last year were unbelievable. Maybe the best fantasy football season of all time from a running back on a per touch basis. I mean, this guy was averaging 20 plus fantasy points per game, and he was only touching the ball around 10 times. A very small frame from Achane. I just don't know if he's going to be able to hold up on an entire season if he's the lead back for the Miami Dolphins. Yes, Raheem Mostert did have 20 plus touchdowns. We're not expecting that again from a guy over the age of 31 years old. So Achane should look to get involved more this upcoming season, but I just project him to be more of a gadget player than a volume-eating running back for this Dolphins team. While it is a good offense, there are so many concerns with the stability of Achane. We've seen injuries already plague him in his young career. If you could tell me that Achane was healthy for all 17 games, I would be drafting him probably in the first or second round. That's such a concern with a guy with such a small frame. That's why I have him a little bit lower in my rankings. Rounding out my top 12 running backs, I have King Derrick Henry now for the Baltimore Ravens. We've seen diminishing production from Henry over the last 3 fully healthy seasons from him. Yards per carry numbers have been declining the last couple of seasons. 30-year-old plus running backs in the NFL, probably not something you want to be banking on in fantasy football unless you're Raheem Mostert last year, scoring 20 touchdowns. Does Derrick Henry have the ability to score 20 touchdowns in this Baltimore Ravens offense? I do believe he does. And that's the only way he's going to pay dividends in your fantasy leagues if he's hitting the 15 to 20 touchdown mark. Right now, his over-under is at 10.5 touchdowns. But in the beginning of the season, before Keaton Mitchell comes back from that devastating injury at the end of last year, I do think Henry is going to dominate the work in this backfield with Justice Hill as his only real competition. At 13-14, I have James Cook and Rashad White. 2 guys I was profiling as sleepers last year. You were getting them after round 9. Definitely performed well and contributed to some people's fantasy playoff runs. I think they're very comparable players. Definitely guys that can help in the receiving game, but are they going to deliver on the goal line for their teams? I mean, Josh Allen's still the best goal line back in Buffalo. Rashad White and this Buccaneers team did have a problem scoring on the ground in the red zone, but solid RB2 options in my opinion with that receiving work baked into their game. Next, I have Alvin Kamara. age 29, a little bit older than you might expect from Kamara, was able to put up 17 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues, so still a very viable option in fantasy. This offense in New Orleans could be abysmal, but the check down princess at quarterback in Derek Carr should help to propel Kamara to be a viable fantasy option. At RB16, I have Joe Mixon. I'm not sold on Mixon in Houston. It is a great offense in Houston with CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and now Stephon Diggs. But Joe Mixon's been in a great offense in Cincinnati, and he still hasn't been a league-winning type running back. He's kind of always disappointed in a way. Still had some very formidable games in fantasy and seasons, but not what you expected from Mixon in such a great offense and the talent he was coming out of college. Also, an aging running back Mixon is. Let's not forget, Dameon Pierce is still on this team. Now, his numbers were atrocious last year, but he's still probably going to factor in a somewhat of a role for this Texans offense. With that being said, and Joe Mixon's efficiency in Cincinnati, I'm not sold on him being a league-winning player. That's why I have him down here at 16 in my rankings. Next, I have Aaron Jones, a tier below. These aging running backs seem to dominate these middle tiers, but he's going to a good offense in Minnesota. Some question marks at the quarterback position between J.J. McCarthy and Sam Darnold, but it can't be worse than what Alexander Madison was for this team, so I do have some faith in Aaron Jones. I think one of the more efficient running backs in the league. If he can stay healthy, I do like his outlook in Minnesota. Next two running backs, I have Kenneth Walker and DeAndre Swift. I like these running backs by themselves. I mean, K9, he showed last year, when healthy, he's the RB1 for this Seattle team. Now, does Zach Charbonnet get more of a workload in his second year? Probably. That's why he's a little bit lower on these rankings. While a majority of the year last season, he was a top 12 running back when healthy. And DeAndre Swift had a pretty solid season with the Philadelphia Eagles. He is the only running back not to suit up in the Hall of Fame game, rested with most of the starters. So that is a good sign for Swift. He should be the number one running back ahead of Roshan Johnson and Khalil Herbert. So Swift, I think, in a projected much better offense for the Chicago Bears team with Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze. I think there is some upside for this receiving back trying to establish an RB1 role for himself. James Conner and Javonte Williams next. Both in bad offenses. Javonte Williams in a much worse offense in Denver than James Conner is with a healthy Kyler Murray. But I expect Javonte to be the RB1 in Denver, despite some reports on him making the roster. I expect him to be the clear RB1. And James Conner, a great season last year. I think he can continue that if he stays healthy. Now, Trey Benson's going to factor into this backfield in Arizona. When James Conner gets hurt, I think Benson could make a name for himself in fantasy. But in the beginning of the year, I do expect him to dominate this backfield. Next two guys I have, Najee Harris and David Montgomery. Two guys, both with competition in their backfield. Maybe both of these guys as the number two running backs in their backfield. Obviously, for David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs has overstepped him in that Lions backfield. While Jaylen Warren is a thorn in Najee's side, I still do think Najee's going to control this backfield. Probably 55-45 split with Najee getting the workload at the goal line as a much bigger back. He's a former first-round pick, so I do want to bank on him getting more touches than Jaylen Warren, even if on a per-touch basis, he's much more efficient. But David Montgomery, even as the number two option in his backfield, on a much better offense in Detroit than Najee is in Pittsburgh. And to round out my top 24, I do have Rhamindre Stevenson. Gets a new contract from the New England Patriots, but so does Antonio Gibson as the receiving back in this Patriots offense, which profiles to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL. I think bottom two, according to most sites you're going to see. So with some bad quarterback play, some added competition from Gibson, few trips to the red zone. Rhamindre Stevenson, not one of my favorite players to draft. I don't see the ceiling, but I do have him in the top 24 with that new contract and probably a full control of the ground game, with Gibson just playing a factor on third down. But that's going to wrap up my top 24 running backs heading into fantasy football 2024. Let me know who you agree with. Obviously, no one's going to agree with me completely or at all, actually. So let me know who you're moving up or down and who I left off this list that you think is going to finish as a top 24 running back. Let me know in the comments section. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more fantasy football content. I'm going to be coming out with more content each and every week leading up to the season. If not for me, hit the like button for Goose, the German Shepherd. He's tuning in each week to get this advice. But we thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next week with another episode, The Fantasy Birds.